Good morning to our audience of the Ave Maria Catholic Radio in Bulgaria. We are very happy here to welcome Friar Thomas Joseph White, who is from the Order of Preachers and is an actual rector of the Angelicum University, Pontifical University in Rome, has been very gracious to give us his time here in Bulgaria for both Dominican School Veritas and his talk at the university. Welcome, Father. We are very glad to have you.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Being a rector and being a professor and academic, your schedule must be quite busy. And such an invitation from a small country where Catholics are such a minority, and your talks could have been given in front of just a handful of people. It would not have been rude if you had declined this invitation. What was your personal motivation to accept it?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that Bulgaria represents an opportunity for the Catholic Church to have a profound conversation with Orthodox Christians. And also yesterday in the University of Sofia, there were Orthodox Christians present, including a young bishop, and it was interesting to engage with them and talk with them. There's also the fact that the Catholic community is important everywhere. The Church has a missionary life, and our mission is to present the fullness of the Catholic truth with charity and with love to all human beings, and to think even anew in new circumstances. How do we be Catholic today? So, you know, when you come to a new culture, you also learn more about what it means to be Christian in that culture, and so what it means to be Christian. I think for the missionary in us to be in a new place is also to grow as a Christian in our own life. So I am interested in seeing the wider Church and humbly contributing to the mission of the Church.
Yeah, thank you very much. So it's in a way a mutual exchange for us, but you have given us so much through these talks, and in your lecture about the importance of Thomistic thought, you mentioned three ways of thinking of Thomas's thought that would improve the new evangelization, and it was the knowledge of God, the lack of opposition between Catholic faith and modern sciences, and the revival of a common morality. But what do you think, besides on purposes of new evangelization, do you think the Thomistic thought is important for the personal faith of any believer?
Well, I think every believer needs to consider the reasons why they believe in God, and they need to consider what they believe a human being is, including the spiritual life of the mind and the heart, the will. And I think they need to consider also how we direct our free activity toward the goodness of God and the good of human beings. So you might call it a basic philosophical framework. I am not speaking of a developed philosophy or high theoretical framework, but I think every believer has a kind of not just faith and belief and theology, but also a kind of philosophy of thinking about God, human persons, and moral agency. And for this, Aquinas is not essential, but he is one of the most privileged resources. He's recommendable. He's the common doctor in the sense that we could all commonly be helped by him, or be assisted by him in thinking out a deeper philosophy of life as Christian believers.
You actually answered my further questions, that some amount of philosophy is necessary for any believer. You cannot just stay with the dogmas, because I have the dogmas, I have faith, I've been given faith by God, and that suffices me. And even in the Thomistic Institute Aquinas 101 videos, the slogan is, "It matters what you think."
Yeah.
So you definitely say we need to develop our understanding to the extent we can touch the truths of faith.
Well, I'll tell you a story. I had a friend in university at Oxford in England who was British, and he was skeptical, or maybe agnostic, and he went to Eucharistic adoration, and he had a very deep experience of Christ in the Eucharist. And he understood that he needed to become Catholic or embrace the Catholic faith fully. But as a scientist, he didn't understand really how to think about God, because he primarily thought about reality in terms of material component parts and atoms, chemicals, cells, organic structures, which is the way he was trained to think. So he was on his way to conversion, but he also needed to start thinking about how can he even think about God. And there you just see a kind of initial beginning of the necessity of some philosophy interior to faith. Faith can take the initiative, grace can come first, but then it has to awaken our nature so that our nature also thinks about the reasonableness of belief. And grace, in a way, stimulates us to recover a sense of the natural orientation toward the transcendence of God.
So grace comes first, but we need reason as well, and we need to use it in full. So what would you recommend as an, how to put it, formational or philosophical equipment for a layperson who is willing to be capable of better communicating the truths of the Gospels? Can you give us an example of minimal set or something like that?
The magisterium of the Catholic Church does often indicate resources, not just theology. There's a lot of theology available on the Vatican websites, but also some indication is given in the tradition of the Church about philosophical ideas that are helpful. The happy thing is today, at least in the English-speaking world, and therefore on the internet in English, there is a lot available for people who want to understand Thomas Aquinas and basic philosophy. You mentioned the American series Aquinas 101, which has short videos that make it introductions to Thomism available. There are also a number of great authors who are writing introductory books. I think of the American philosopher Edward Fazer, who has a blog and writes introductory books to the thinking of St. Thomas. So I think there are also a lot of great podcasts and online resources. And those, I think, really do work to help people get started. Eventually it can be very helpful to really just read St. Thomas without being afraid to misunderstand him or to be confused. Everyone, when they start reading Thomas Aquinas, feels intimidated by the specialized vocabulary, these terms like substance and accident, act and potentiality, and maybe they seem either abstract or historically outdated or unclear. But actually, with time, it's easy to begin to understand their key meaning, to understand how they're actually quite realistic for everyone today, how it's compatible to think about Thomas Aquinas and modern science, or Thomas Aquinas and ordinary common sense experience, or human psychology. And at some point, it can become pretty easy to understand. It's like almost like breaking a code. And then eventually his thought becomes very luminous, and it helps us understand the mysteries of the faith while respecting that they are mysteries without rationalism, and helping us understand our human nature and how we can approach God intellectually. So it can be a very powerful tool, and also it can be a tool for helping explain things to other people with serenity, with peacefulness, with reasonableness, but also with mysticism, with respect for mystery. With Aquinas, we don't have to choose reason or mystery. It's all a respect of nature and the intelligibility of the world, and a respect for transcendence and mystery and grace and the mysteries of faith. And these are compatible, not opposed to one another.
Yeah, because many people would oppose them, and they would, for example, reference to the end of life of Thomas Aquinas, when he had this mystical experience that he wanted to burn his writings because what he experienced in this mystical experience was so powerful that he thought that everything he wrote and thought, even though Jesus affirmed that his teachings was right.
I mean,
so
I don't think he told them to burn his writings. Actually, I don't think that's
it's
true.
It's a myth?
Yeah, that's inaccurate,
Okay.
I think. But I think what he said was that everything I've written up to now is straw.
Yeah.
But actually, when you look at the straw signification in the Italian of his time, it also has the connotation of footnotes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's,
Yeah, that's very
in a way, what
interesting.
he's saying is, I've only written footnotes, and he means to Scripture.
This is very
So he means,
interesting.
he's saying, what he said to Reginald, his secretary, was, it's an interpretation, but I think it's defensible from serious historians. Everything I've written now is footnotes to Scripture, and the Scriptures will always be there. Because they said, why don't you keep writing after your vision? And he said, well, I've written footnotes. So other people still can comment Scripture.
Very
The church will
interesting.
go on.
Yeah.
So I think it's more moderate. You know, it's certainly he didn't reject his teachings.
Okay. Okay. So
No.
that gives some clarity on the matter. And you mentioned earlier that this philosophy of Thomas Aquinas is not essential. I mean, it is universal.
It's not required.
But it's not required, right? Because I think I've read somewhere, but maybe it's not true, that at some point the Catholic Church declared the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas as the official philosophy of the Church.
Well, so there are only 3 names that appear in the Code of Canon Law:
Okay.
Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, and Thomas Aquinas. And Thomas Aquinas appears there because it's recommended in canon law that all clerics should study his thought.
Okay.
This is also something that is present in the document of the Second Vatican Council on clerical formation, and it's present in subsequent teachings of the Church about formation, including in the recent pontificate of Pope Francis. So Aquinas is seen as a major resource for philosophy and theology. At the same time, in his document, Fides et Ratio, St. John Paul II says the Church has no official philosophy, but permits a wide range of philosophies that could cooperate with faith.
Yeah.
Although not all philosophy can cooperate with faith, and Aquinas is a preeminent exemplar of the cooperation of faith and reason. The way I think about common doctor is to use an image. It's like the foyer of a house or the living room of a palace. When you first come in, you enter this grand hall, and this is, in a way, the intellectual thought of Thomas Aquinas. If you want to enter into philosophy and theology in the Catholic Church, the Church says, come into this front room and study Aquinas as a kind of common entryway. Then you can explore other rooms in the palace, and there are many other rooms. In my Father's house, there are many mansions, but many chambers. But in those different chambers and with those different thinkers, you can always find a connection back if you have entered through Thomas Aquinas, and it allows you an orientation to the whole. It's advantageous because then you can understand the other thinkers better, because you first looked at the synthesis and the depth and the range of Aquinas' regard on human nature and on God and on nature through philosophy and theology. You don't have to come in the house this direction. You can come in through the side door. But it's better, even if you come in through the side door, to eventually come into this main room and study St. Thomas, so you have an idea about the larger architecture of historical Catholic thought. So this is just a kind of metaphor, but I think it's a helpful image about the centrality of Aquinas. But that being said, people live in different spaces in the Church, and the Church wants people to understand they have that freedom, and that there are riches, and there is beauty, and there's decorousness, the sophistication in other traditions and domains of the Church's life.
Yeah. So if we have to summarize about a regular Christian, maybe start from some content on the internet, good content about Aquinas, but don't be afraid to start reading Aquinas himself.
Yeah.
Maybe it would take some effort, but one should.
Well, it takes a lifetime to really study St. Thomas, but not in a weighty or oppressive sense of I'll never understand it, but in the sense that it's something that helps you think more deeply about life, just like you understand friendship better through your life, or you might understand who Christ is better throughout your whole life. Aquinas introduces you into thinking about things like the virtues, like what justice is, or what human freedom is. He's pretty intelligible. It's pretty easy to read Aquinas on human freedom if you have a good guide at the beginning, and then you can understand what human freedom is. But then as you think about it later in life, you understand it more deeply. And going back to him, you see that he has insights throughout his life that actually help you have insights throughout your life. It doesn't mean he's the only person I read or that the Thomists read, but he helps you think through human experience very profoundly. So studying him over a long period is also a kind of pathway, not just to reading Aquinas, but to thinking about the reality we experience every day. And analyzing it more deeply.
So a good tool for processing kind of our lives and what's happening. Acquiring this his way of thinking, and would be useful kind of to think about.
Well, another image is this: when we're studying with Aquinas, we're looking over his shoulder. We're looking with him at what is he looking at. So if he's looking at God, we're looking into God to see what he sees. When he's looking at what a human being is, or what human freedom is, or what human virtue is, we're looking with him into the human being. We're really trying to see reality. He's a great student of reality. Also, when he's looking at the Eucharist, or he's looking at Christ, or he's looking at the Virgin Mary, he's helping us see these realities themselves. So really studying with him is to study reality. And to try to think about it more deeply, and even to take joy in delight and joy in knowing reality, knowing God, knowing Christ, experiencing the grace of the sacraments. So, for example, if you study Aquinas on what is the grace of the Eucharist, or what is the grace of sacramental confession, or what is the grace of baptism, it becomes much easier to recognize in reality what is the grace of Eucharistic adoration, or the grace of the sacrifice of the Mass, or the grace of going to Holy Confession, or what is the grace of my own baptism that I may have almost never thought about, but now I can reactuate a sense of its lived meaning and grace. So he's making you pay attention to the profound, deep spiritual dimension of reality. In that sense, it's helpful for being ourselves, for thinking most deeply about our identity, about God, about grace. So this is a kind of spirituality of learning. You're learning to grow spiritually in the appreciation of the reality of Christ, the reality of grace, and its effect on human nature.
Yeah, beautifully put. I'd like to move to a particular question concerning modern science. There have been theories, I don't know how to call them, but it's been speculated that some modern scientists would say there is actually no free choice, because in nature everything has its cause, and everything is caused, so our actions are caused, and they can just be explained by one or complexity of different causes, and that would only lead to one effect, and that we cannot believe that we can change this causality in our minds. Is not this aligned in a way with Thomas's thought of causality, and how, apart from revelation, because we know from revelation that we have free choice, how Aquinas reconciles this?
Oh, Aquinas definitely affirms that we can know we have free choice philosophically and rationally, independently of revelation. I mean, it's the common sense opinion that we acquire from ordinary experience, that we know that we think, and that we know that we choose freely. Now, what happens in materialist philosophies is that you acquire one of two different positions, typically. One is a reductivist position that says, it looks like you have free will, but all of this is actually just the product of micro-causal structures coming from matter, so we should reduce the explanation to these micro-causal structures, and therefore reduce what we consider common sense, free will, to something that's not free will. Or the anti-realist position, that's more extreme, that says you think you're thinking, you think you have free will, but actually all that's an illusion that's just being produced in the fog of your brain because of microscopic activities
kind of a
that we can
product.
of physics, of physical reality. I mean, that's a really deep kind of anti-realist, physicalist reductionism. But against both these positions, I mean, Aquinas will say not only do we know that we think and know and choose and have free will, but then we can also demonstrate that there is a different kind of causality here than merely physical natural causalities. So he does acknowledge physical natural causalities, and he calls those kind of causalities of physical necessity. But then he talks about contingent causal structures of the will. The will contingently moves toward one good or another through rational deliberation. So I can choose to live in city A or in city B through a rational deliberation and truly contingently choose that without being externally compelled by necessity or by violence. And that's the product of spiritual rationality. Now, how do you show it's immaterial and not merely material? There, Aquinas will look at the nature of abstraction. What does it mean that we think in universal abstract concepts? How do we motivate our thinking through logical reasoning rather than physical necessity? The logical necessities of reason are the ones that move thought forward, but they come from within universal reflection, not extrinsically imposed by physical necessity. So there's a sort of philosophy of natural reasoning, and then the will is moved by deliberations of reason about the good. Do I choose to become a doctor? Do I choose to become a scientist? Do I choose to become a lawyer? Or whatever. These are deliberations of reason that then move us toward different goods. And that's the origin of human freedom, the deliberative decision to pursue this good or that good, this means to an end, that means to an end. So we can understand a kind of, you might say, scientific structure of human freedom, but it's a human freedom that is based on immaterial reasoning in view of true, free spiritual choices. Now that is conducted in an animal life of sensate passions, sensate emotions, sensations, imagination, and sensate memory, and physical corporeal existence. So we can look at people's free choices to some, you might say, externally, by studying the biological side or reflection. But on the deep down, in the essence of human freedom, there's something immaterial about human personhood. Of course, this is a great debate between philosophy that stems from within Christian tradition and materialist philosophy that stems from within modern naturalistic or scientistic perspectives. The Christian has to be completely open to the discoveries of science, but the Christian also needs to insist on that fact that there are immaterial operations of knowledge and love in human persons that are not reducible merely to the material.
Is this not a kind of philosophy of gaps? Because we cannot prove that we don't see the chain of causes, and that's why we suppose that there is something immaterial.
Well, that's what a lot of materialists will say. We will eventually explain what you call mind and will. The problem with that is that that presupposes we have no adequate philosophical knowledge of the mind and will that can demonstrate the immateriality of the operations. And this is also related to the idea that really the only genuine explanations come through the physical sciences. That is itself a positivistic presupposition. But that is a false presupposition. We have all kinds of knowledge that's metaphysical or ethical that does not come just through the modern sciences. For example, no one has ever seen human justice or human rights under a microscope. No modern science can talk about human justice or human rights, but they exist. So they are known in another mode that is metaphysical and philosophical in regard to our knowledge of nature and human nature. We have, through this other philosophical means, according to St. Thomas, and I think truly, the power to demonstrate philosophically that there are intrinsically immaterial operations of reason and will. Thus, they can never be understood adequately by the methodologies of positivistic science. Now, a lot of scientists will just say, we don't believe that, but this is because of a philosophical anemia or a philosophical weakness of formation, rather than through the strength of their scientific reasoning. So it's a deficit of understanding, not an advantage. This is, of course, the real point of often conflict, but it also has to do with hyper-specialization. People who spend their whole life only doing carpentry think that the whole world is made of wood and of nails and of hammers. And people who spend their whole life doing biology, chemistry, and physics tend to think the whole world is just material particles. The whole world is not just material particles, but our only access to the deeper realm of human spirit is through philosophy or through theology and revelation. So you have to go to the object of study, or the science, the scientific object, through the science that will get you there. You don't ask a physicist to write poetry for you, and you don't ask a poet to construct an airplane that will be safe to fly in. You know, so there's different specializations, but to know what a human being is in the depths, you need philosophy.
Yeah, thank you for that. And to conclude, I would like to jump over to your other career, if I may put it so. You're singer, banjo player, and a composer in the already become famous band Hillbilly Thomists.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about it?
Well, it's an eccentricity, but the Dominican priests of my province, there are 8 of us who have a folk music bluegrass band, which plays music from the Appalachian mountain region of the southeast of the United States.
Okay.
And this is a kind of style of folk music from the United States, which employs mandolin, banjo, dobro, which has actually an Eastern European origin of in California, and it's basically a resonator guitar, slide guitar, and fiddle or violin. Yeah. And we started doing it for fun in Formation House in the Formation House in Washington, and then we moved to creating an album as an experiment, and it went into the Billboard charts for folk music or bluegrass music in America, and then we made 3 more albums, and of the 4 albums, 3 of them have been on the Billboard charts, and now it's become sort of a famous band with Catholic families. We have tens of thousands of fans in America, and we're on Spotify,
including me,
Apple Music. Yeah, so there's some international followers, and so the Hillbilly Thomists, you can find it on the website. You can find all the music for free on YouTube. You can find it on Spotify. We have more music under preparation. We hope to make an album in the coming year. 5th album, so we're working on it. We play concerts around America.
And for us listeners, it's just pleasant to have a kind of music which is recreational music in a way, but with Christian content, because it's both deep and sometimes humorous, and it's just you can have fun without being afraid that you're going to need to admit some lyrics that are not appropriate.
Well, yeah, it's music for ordinary life.
Yeah,
it's music for ordinary time, we say sometimes. In driving in the car, in the background, music for having friends over. Sure. And it does have a lot of theological lyrics. Yeah. Some of them are humorous. Sometimes there's inside jokes about the teaching of Thomas Aquinas, or literary references. And you know, but we find a lot of people listen to the music also when they're suffering, or when they have a loved one in the hospital. Some of the songs are very serious too. You know, some of them are very profound. So, yeah, it's become a music that accompanies a lot of Catholics in ordinary life, and we've been very moved by that. We've been surprised by its popularity, and very grateful for it.
For maybe some overly pious soul, for example, one of your lyrics of one of your most famous songs, Bourbon, Bluegrass, and the Bible, would be maybe worrying. How do you reconcile this in one line? I mean, people can say you Catholics think about drinking, you diminish the Bible, and so on and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Well, that song was written during COVID lockdown, and it's about survival. So the lyric says, "Death is in the world, and it has gone viral. Everybody's talking about a new revival, but when it's a question of love and survival, bourbon, bluegrass, and the Bible.
Okay.
So the idea is that
The
bourbon,
particular
bluegrass, and the Bible
context.
are... Yeah, although I would say, I think it's very popular with fathers of homeschool families where they have 6 children. And I think bourbon is probably part of the way the father is surviving, you know, working, taking care of 6 children.
Yeah.
So I suspect there's, you know, let's call it moderate use of recreational alcohol as an aspect of relaxation and temperance, according to the just mean, as St. Thomas would say. So, you know, there's all things in moderation.
I think this is a good point to conclude. Thank you once again. And to our audience, you'll be able to find the talks of Father Thomas on the Ave Maria radio, which has been very graceful to give us this floor. And thank you once again, Father.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.